This is The Full View. Welcome back. Well, in big news that have put South Africa in the international spotlight is their application to the International Court of Justice, the UN's highest decision-making body, accusing Israel and its officials and/or agents to have acted with the intent to destroy Palestinians out in Gaza, part of the protected group under the Genocide Convention. Now, Israel has agreed to appear before the ICJ in its defense against these claims, but had very scathing remarks against South Africa, even suggesting that South Africa is working with a group to support Hamas and destroy Israel. The date for that hearing has since been set down for the 11th and 12th of January. To discuss this case further, let's extend a very warm welcome to Attorney and Legal Analyst, Mr. Thamsanqa Malusi. Thamsanqa, compliments to you and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. So you say in your abstract that most people don't even understand what this case really entails. Please elaborate on that, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's particularly unique to this case. I think generally whenever there's legal matters that are of public interest, people, I mean, they generally are interested in the matter, but I don't think people generally understand what the legal implications are. And I think particularly in this case, it's not very common that South Africa gets a case being heard before the International Court of Justice. So it's even more complicated in this case because the general rules that apply in the high courts, constitutional courts here, and the standards of proof, etc., are not the same in the International Court of Justice. So there's also an added layer of complication that comes with the case. So one, it's not unique to this case, but also two, there's added layers of complication given the fact that this is unfamiliar territory.
Very interesting there, Thamsanqa, because as we understand, the news that have just come in is that Judge Moseneke will form part of these proceedings. In your understanding of the ICJ processes, please elaborate further on how these sittings actually work.
So there is, one, the ICJ is the judicial organ of the United Nations. So it's established in terms of the UN Charter. And it's primarily there to adjudicate on matters that relate to member states of the United Nations. But in specific instances, there may be conventions or treaties that specifically state that the ICJ has jurisdiction over disputes that relates to those conventions or treaties. And that's exactly what happened here. So South Africa's case against Israel is based on the Genocide Convention of 1948. And specifically in that convention, it states that the ICJ has jurisdiction to hear matters that relate to the Genocide Convention. So international law operates slightly differently to domestic law because in order for one, a convention or treaty to be applicable, countries have to be signatories to it. And in order for a court to have jurisdiction over certain countries, those countries actually have to subject themselves to the jurisdiction of that court. So in this case, both South Africa and Israel are parties to the Genocide Convention, and both South Africa and Israel have subjected themselves to the jurisdiction of the ICJ by virtue of the fact that they're members of the United Nations, because if you're a member of the United Nations, you automatically are subjected to the jurisdiction of the ICJ. So effectively, that's how the ICJ works. And with respect to the former Deputy Chief Justice, the ICJ statute specifically provides that if your country does not have a judge that currently sits in the ICJ, and you have a matter as a country before the ICJ, you are able to elect one person to sit as a judge in the ICJ. So in this case, South Africa currently does not have a judge in the ICJ, and so South Africa has elected to appoint the former Deputy Chief Justice in the bench. Interestingly, we will have Professor Tlale of UP has been appointed in the ICJ, but his tenure only begins in February, so he hasn't started yet. And this case is being heard next week. Hence, South Africa has elected to appoint the former Deputy Chief Justice.
And Thamsanqa, look, Durko also said that they are fully aware of the previous rulings by the ICJ being ignored, but have applied under a different article that seeks binding measures on those taken to appear before the court. So some hope there for an end to the impasse for the people of Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, all ICJ decisions are binding in nature. So the countries that are subjected to the jurisdiction of the ICJ are bound by the decision of the ICJ. The issue is ICJ decisions are very hard to enforce. It's not like domestic law; they simply just arrest you if you don't comply with the court order. In instances of the ICJ, that's not as easy to implement, even though countries are bound by the decision of the ICJ. An example is, for example, Russia was found to have also contravened the Genocide Convention in its invasion of Ukraine and was ordered to cease its operation in Ukraine in 2022 by the ICJ, and it has simply ignored that order. So, you know, it's not as always as easy to enforce. That being said, though, you know, there are it's not merely legal consequences that may well flow from the decision of the ICJ. There's also economical and political consequences, which may cause a country like Israel to think twice before not complying with the orders of the ICJ. So, yeah, as much as they're hard to enforce, there are instances in the past where they have been enforced. And in fact, there's a specific provisions within the ICJ statute that says if a country does not comply with the order of the ICJ, the aggrieved country can approach the Security Council for it to help it enforce the order of the ICJ. But there's also complications there as well because, you know, the permanent state members have veto powers on any resolution of the ICJ. And in the past, the US has vetoed almost all decisions that relate to Israel-Palestine conflict in protection of Israel. So there may well be, if the ICJ does find in favor of South Africa and Israel does not comply with the order of the ICJ, South Africa can approach the Security Council for assistance, but the Security Council, specifically through the US, may well not assist South Africa if previous practices are anything to go by.
Thamsanqa, I wish we had more time to go over those very valid and important points, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But thank you so much for your contributions. Attorney there and legal analyst Thamsanqa Malusi on South Africa's application to the ICJ against Israel. The date, of course, for that hearing has been set for the 11th and 12th of this month.